The Essex, when the hunter became the prey. The whale hit like a battering ram. Not from below, not from the side, head on. A 90-ton sperm whale, 85 feet of muscle and bone and rage, charging at the ship like it knew exactly what it was doing. The impact sent a shudder through every plank of the Essex, a vibration that traveled from the keel to the mast tips, and then came the sound, a wet, splintering crack as the oak hull caved in like a kicked door. First Mate Owen Chase was on deck. He saw it happen, watched the whale surface 50 yards out, turn, and accelerate. He screamed a warning, but there was no time. The whale struck the bow at ramming speed, and the entire ship lurched backward like it had hit a reef. Men tumbled, barrels rolled. The foremast swayed. Chase thought it was over, thought the whale would swim away, wounded, confused. But the creature surfaced again, circled, and came back for a second strike. This time it hit harder. The bow shattered. Water poured into the forward hold. The Essex, a Nantucket whaleship that had survived 3 years in the Pacific hunting the very creatures now killing it, began to die. She had 20 minutes before she went under. 20 men, 3 small whaleboats, 2,000 miles from the nearest civilized land, and the ocean, vast and indifferent, waiting to erase them. This is the story of the Essex, the story that inspired Moby Dick. But Herman Melville's novel is fiction. What happened to the crew of the Essex was real, and it was worse. But before the ocean claimed them, there was the hunt. Nantucket, 1819. A gray rock of an island off the coast of Massachusetts, populated by Quakers and whalers and men who made their fortunes in blood and oil. Whale oil lit the lamps of America, lubricated the machines of the Industrial Revolution, made men rich. The Essex was a typical whale ship, 87 feet long, reinforced hull, equipped with brick try-works for rendering blubber into oil. She carried a crew of 21, most of them teenagers, boys from farms who signed on for a 2-year voyage because the sea paid better than the plow. Captain George Pollard, Jr. was 28, young for a captain, promoted after the previous commander retired. He was competent, cautious, well-liked, but he lacked the edge, the hunger. He was a captain by appointment, not by nature. His first mate was Owen Chase, 23 years old, ambitious, brutal, a man who saw the whale not as an animal, but as a commodity, a swimming fortune waiting to be harpooned. Chase wanted his own ship, his own command, and he resented Pollard for standing in his way. There was tension, a quiet rivalry, the kind of thing that stays buried as long as the voyage goes well. The Essex left Nantucket in August 1819, sailed south around Cape Horn, and entered the Pacific. The hunting was good. They filled barrel after barrel with sperm oil, the finest and most valuable kind. But the Pacific is vast. Whales are fast. And the crew pushed farther and farther west, chasing rumors of pods that hadn't been hunted yet. By November 1820, they were 1,500 miles west of South America, in the middle of nowhere. And that's where the whale found them. When the Essex went down, the crew had 15 minutes to salvage what they could. They grabbed navigational instruments, some hardtack biscuits, a few casks of water. Not enough. Never enough. They launched 3 whaleboats, each one 20 feet long, open to the sky, designed to chase whales for a few hours, not to cross an ocean. 20 men divided into 3 crews. Pollard took one boat, Chase took another. Second mate Matthew Joy took the third. They did the math. 2,000 miles to the coast of South America, sailing east against the prevailing winds and currents. Impossible. To the west, closer, were the Marquesas Islands, Polynesian territory. But the sailors had heard stories. Cannibals, savages who killed and ate shipwrecked crews. The irony would become apparent later. They made a decision. They would sail south, catch the trade winds, and aim for the coast of Chile. A longer route, but safer, civilized. It was the wrong choice. Imagine being in one of those boats. 20 feet of wood between you and 3 miles of ocean. No shelter, no shade. The sun directly overhead, equatorial, relentless. It bakes the wood until it's too hot to touch, blisters the skin on your face, your hands, your lips. The salt spray coats everything, gets into every crack and cut, turns your skin into leather. They had 600 pounds of hardtack, a few casks of water. They rationed it, 3 ounces of bread per man per day, half a pint of water. Just enough to keep you alive, not enough to keep you sane. The boats stayed together at first, sailed south. The wind was weak, the current fought them. They made maybe 30 miles a day, and they needed to cover 2,000. Do the math, 65 days at that pace. And they only had food for 60. The first week was discipline, routine. They sailed during the day, lay to at night, shared the rations evenly, kept their spirits up with songs and prayers. But the Pacific doesn't care about morale. The second week, men started to crack. The thirst was unbearable. They tried drinking seawater. Big mistake. Salt water dehydrates you faster, shuts down your kidneys, drives you mad. Some of the men drank it anyway, in secret, at night. By morning, they were delirious, babbling, seeing things that weren't there. They tried to catch rain, rigged up the sails to funnel water into the casks. But it didn't rain. The sky stayed bright and blue and merciless. They started drinking their own urine, collected it in bottles, let it sit, tried to filter it through cloth. It didn't work. Urine is waste. Your body has already pulled the water out. Drinking it again just poisons you. But they did it anyway. On the 20th day, they saw land. Henderson Island, a tiny coral atoll in the middle of the Pacific. Uninhabited, barren. But it had fresh water. A spring, brackish and foul-tasting, but drinkable. And there were birds. Thousands of them, nesting in the rocks, easy to catch. They stayed for a week, ate until their stomachs ached, drank until they couldn't hold anymore, searched the island for anything useful, found nothing. No trees big enough for timber, no materials to repair the boats, just rock and bird shit and the certainty that if they stayed, they would starve once the birds were gone. They made another decision. They would leave, sail for Easter Island, another 1,000 miles south. 3 men volunteered to stay behind. They chose to take their chances on the island rather than the ocean. The rest got back in the boats. By the 30th day, the rations were gone. The water was gone. They were sailing on hope and nothing else. Men started to die. The first was a young sailor named Richard Peterson. He went quietly, lay down in the bottom of the boat one evening, closed his eyes, and didn't wake up. Dehydration, starvation, exposure. Take your pick. They sewed him into a piece of canvas, said a prayer, and pushed him over the side. The second man died 3 days later, then a third, and then someone said it. The thing no one wanted to say, but everyone was thinking. We can't waste the meat. There's a process to it, a cold mechanical logic that erases the humanity of the act. First, you stop thinking of the body as a person. It's not your shipmate anymore. It's not the boy who shared his tobacco or told jokes during the dog watch. It's meat, protein, the only thing standing between you and death. Second, you draw straws, or you wait for someone to die naturally. You don't murder, not yet. That comes later. Third, you butcher, quickly, efficiently. You've done this 100 times with whales, with seals, with fish. A body is just another carcass. You remove the organs, separate the muscle from the bone, cut it into portions. Fourth, you eat. They tried cooking it at first, built a small fire in the bottom of the boat using pieces of the hull. But the smoke made them sick, and the fire risked burning through the wood. So they ate it raw, chewed it slowly, forced it down. Some men refused, turned away, said they'd rather die than break God's law. They died. The rest survived. By the 50th day, the 3 boats had drifted apart. Chase's boat was alone. Pollard's boat was alone. Joy's boat had disappeared entirely, lost in a storm, all hands presumed dead. In Chase's boat, men were dying faster than they could eat them. The bodies piled up. The survivors became methodical. When a man died, they stripped him, butchered him, divided the meat equally, sucked the marrow from the bones, cracked the skull, and ate the brain. Chase kept a journal, wrote everything down, the dates, the deaths, the weather. He didn't mention the cannibalism directly, but he didn't need to. The math told the story. 20 men left the Essex, only 8 were still alive, and they weren't throwing bodies overboard anymore. In Pollard's boat, things were worse. They ran out of natural deaths. The men were too weak to hunt, too delirious to fish. So they made a decision. They drew lots. The process was simple. Each man drew a slip of paper. One slip was marked. Whoever drew it would be shot. The man who drew the short straw was Owen Coffin, 17 years old, Captain Pollard's cousin. A boy Pollard had known since birth. A boy Pollard had promised to bring home safe to Nantucket. Coffin didn't protest, didn't beg. He knew the rules. He'd agreed to them. He shook Pollard's hand, said a prayer, and closed his eyes. They drew again to see who would do the shooting. The shooter was Charles Ramsdell, Coffin's best friend. Ramsdell pulled the trigger. The boy's body slumped. They butchered him within the hour. Pollard didn't eat, not at first, but hunger has a way of erasing morality. By the next day, he was chewing on his cousin's ribs. On February 18, 1821, 93 days after the Essex sank, a ship appeared on the horizon, the Dauphin, a British merchant vessel sailing from Sydney to Valparaiso. The lookout spotted something strange in the water, a small boat drifting. He called the captain. When they pulled alongside, they found 2 men, barely alive, skeletons wrapped in sunburned skin, sitting in the bottom of the boat surrounded by bones, human bones, gnawed clean, cracked open for marrow. The men were Owen Chase and another sailor named Benjamin Lawrence. They could barely speak, couldn't stand, had to be carried aboard and force-fed broth because their stomachs had shrunk too much to handle solid food. Chase's first words were, "Is there another boat?" There was. 3 days later, another ship, the Isabella, found Pollard's boat. 3 men inside, Pollard, Ramsdell, and 1 other. Alive, surrounded by bones. Pollard's first question, "Have you seen my cousin?" The captain didn't understand. Pollard didn't explain. Of the 20 men who left the Essex, 8 survived. 5 in the whaleboats, 3 on Henderson Island, rescued months later by another passing ship. 12 men dead, consumed by the ocean, by starvation, or by their shipmates. Chase wrote a book about it, published in 1821, tried to frame the cannibalism as a tragic necessity, a final resort. The book sold well, made him a small fortune. He never went whaling again. Pollard went back to sea, took command of another ship, the Two Brothers, in 1823. 2 years later, he wrecked it on a reef in the Pacific. Lost the ship, lost his command, lost his reputation. No one would hire him after that. He spent the rest of his life as a night watchman on Nantucket, walking the streets alone, carrying the weight of his cousin's death in silence. When people asked him about the Essex, he would say only this: "The sea and I have settled our accounts." 30 years later, a young writer named Herman Melville heard the story. He was a former whaler himself, had sailed the Pacific, knew the life. He took the skeleton of the Essex tragedy, the vengeful whale, the sinking, the survival, and built a novel around it. He called it Moby Dick. But Melville changed the ending. In his version, the whale wins. Captain Ahab drowns, lashed to the beast he hunted. It's a story about obsession, about man's arrogance in the face of nature. The real story is darker. In the real story, nature doesn't need to be vengeful. It just needs to be indifferent. The whale wasn't evil. It was defending itself. The ocean wasn't cruel. It was just empty. And the men who survived didn't become heroes. They became something else, something smaller, something that would wake up at night, decades later, tasting salt and bone. So what do we learn from the Essex? That survival is not noble, it's mechanical. When you strip away civilization, when you remove food and water and hope, you don't reveal man's true strength. You reveal his willingness to do whatever it takes to see another sunrise. And sometimes, that willingness is monstrous. The Essex crew didn't choose to become cannibals. They chose to live. And the price of that choice was everything that made them human. George Pollard lived to be 80, died in his sleep in his small house on Nantucket. But he never stopped being the man who ate his cousin, never stopped being the captain who drew the lots. Every night, when he walked those empty streets with his lantern, he was still in that boat, still holding the bones, still tasting the meat. The Pacific didn't care, the whale didn't care, and neither does history. We remember the story because it's horrifying, because it reminds us how thin the line is between order and chaos. 3 months without food, and Harvard graduates are gnawing on their classmates. 3 months of sun and thirst, and devout Quakers are drawing straws to see who gets shot. That's the real terror of the Essex. Not the whale, not the sinking, but the mirror it holds up, the reflection staring back. Owen Chase spent the rest of his life hoarding food. His family found barrels of hardtack hidden in his attic, in his walls, under his floorboards. He couldn't stop, couldn't shake the fear that the hunger would come back. It never did, but the memory never left. If this story of survival, madness, and the things men do when God isn't watching moved you, share it. Let others know what happened in the Pacific in 1820. Let them know that Moby Dick wasn't just a novel, it was a ghost story. And the ghosts are still out there, drifting in 3 small boats, drawing straws, waiting for the rescue that will cost them everything.